My name is Gilonne, and I wish I could be putting up the basketball game right now, so I'm sorry that I'll make it quick and hopefully very entertaining for you. And hopefully by the time I'll have finished, you won't have had so much wine that you can't learn anything. Lie down, Sophie. Sophie is the chairman of New Harvest. I work for New Harvest, and we're a nonprofit research institute advancing breakthroughs in cellular agriculture, which means that we're advancing research mainly in academic labs, but also independent labs to make animal products without animals. That's meat, milk, eggs, leather, that are made from cell cultures and not harvested from animals. So this quote from Winston Churchill in 1932, it really illustrates the work that we do. In 1932, in this magazine called Popular Mechanics, Winston Churchill was making predictions called 50 years hence. And one of them, he said, 50 years hence, we shall escape the absurdity of growing a whole chicken simply for its breast or its wing by growing those parts separately under a suitable medium. And what he really was describing is cultured products, cultured cells, which right now is being done mainly in medicine for growing a heart or liver or skin, for instance. And by 1982, which was 50 years hence, this had just started when Genentech, which is a company here, had created Humulin, the first time when people who were diabetics could have insulin that was suitable for a human body rather than insulin that was harvested from the pancreas of cows or pigs. It transformed their lives. So essentially they took a cell, a yeast cell, and the yeast cell was genetically coded. They put a genetic code for human insulin, and it turns sugar and minerals into human insulin. And it's transformed people's lives because there's no more rejection and allergies and all those things that used to come. And speaking of cheeses, all cheeses are made exactly with that same system. Until then, cheeses, the rennet that transforms milk, that curdles milk into cheeses, was taken from the fourth stomach of cows. Now it's done, most of it is done through that same system. So why do we do the work we do? Well, Winston Churchill said the system was absurd. Well, today we think the system is even more absurd, and Agad pointed out some of those absolutely monumental numbers, so I'll spare you a little bit, but there are four main reasons. One of them is that the livestock industry poses huge risks to human survival, and this is not hyperbole. The reason why we have antibiotic resistance is because 80% of all antibiotics are given to livestock. This is a photo of the bird flu epidemic that took over the world a few years ago, and these things spread extremely fast. There was, according to one study, 56 billion chickens grown last year for human consumption. And you'll hear Arturo talk about egg whites that he's making in cell cultures. Chickens are an enormous problem, in fermentation. But chickens are an enormous problem because they're grown in so many numbers, and every time a virus transfers from one chicken to the next, it amplifies and it mutates, and then you get monsters like we had recently. And there's more and more of these viral epidemics. Just now we had a bacterium that was found in a woman on the East Coast that for which there is no antibiotic that works. And that comes from pigs in China. So, oh yeah, and here, this is kind of a horrifying photo. This green thing is a lake that in which the green comes from algae, and these squares are all feedlots, and you probably can't see, but inside each feedlots there are little black dots, and those are cows. And that green thing is all their manure. And that is taken in Texas, and it goes down into the Mississippi and into the Gulf of Mexico, creates this dead zone. Big problem. And Another big issue is this terrible stain on our conscience of how some 60 billion animals a year are being treated in absolutely horrific circumstances. Most of the animals that we eat in the United States, about 95% of them are grown in these factory farms, and they will, if you needed any push to become a vegetarian, then you go to a factory farm, and there's one on the way down to Los Angeles. It is a nightmare. So we are at New Harvest developing this field of cellular agriculture, which falls under medical science and food science, but really receives money from neither. So the developments in medical science are things like tissue engineering, where if you get burned, you'll go to the hospital, they'll take a little sample of your skin, grow it in a petri dish, put it back onto your skin, it's your skin. That will be put back onto you, and now these technologies are getting fairly sophisticated. Same thing, we're working with a lab at Harvard where the team is building a heart. Obviously it's not a big heart like that, but they're doing tissue cultures to grow a heart. And then in food science, well, there are all of those things that are being done at Kite Hill, for instance. General Mills has an enormous food science department, but really the merger of those two has not been done until New Harvest. And by the way, we were created in 2004. So what we're saying is that actually we are so separated from nature at this point with these factory farms. And we're wondering if actually having a cultured meat system isn't bringing us back closer to hunting and gathering in terms of the resources that are being used and the purity of the products that are coming out of them. Because, and right now here you have cultured meat, which as you see in terms of the land use, which is the vertical, and the energy use on the horizontal, is absolutely monumental for poultry, pork, lamb, and beef. And the research that, actually the first research in this, but there were subsequent ones on the life cycle analysis of cultured meat versus animal grown meat shows massive savings with cultured meat. But you have to bear in mind that this is still theoretical because the cultured meat does not exist at scale, and I'll show you why afterwards. But this is an interesting question that we can ask ourselves of hunting and gathering probably fits here in that graph, and it's an opportunity for us to return there or a little bit closer to that in terms of the use of our resources. And so we think that this world is not just a pipe dream, we think this world is possible. And Arturo again is going to show you how he's brewing eggs. So this is a moment that was made by Arturo's company, Clara Foods, and it started as a New Harvest egg project, and we wondered, is it possible to use this yeast in the same way that it's making insulin to make egg whites and really turn this very simple feedstock into proteins. Same thing with this this milk, which is cultured free. So it was also a New Harvest milk project, and this is a prototype. I don't think that's exactly milk free entirely because they're still in prototype phase, but they're getting there, and it's a very exciting idea that you could have exactly the same milk, exactly the same egg white that doesn't need an animal to produce it. And finally, this is cultured meat, and I'm going to focus on that for the rest of the presentation, because that's where there are most questions and is furthest away from market. And this cultured meat, this is a burger that was grown in the Netherlands in the Mark Vos lab a few years ago, well, closer to when New Harvest was created. The idea was, could we push research to see if it's feasible to make a cultured meat? And so New Harvest got the Dutch government to fund 3 different research labs in the Netherlands to get a cultured meat project going. And one of them was the Mark Vos lab. We were approached by Sergey Brin Foundation a little bit later, who said, you know, we really want to be funding this kind of research, and we got money to we got the Sergey Brin Foundation to fund this this research in the Netherlands, and this is the burger that came out of it. And so we're very excited about it because this is really what we think is the next revolution, like Agathe was saying, and it's also part of human evolution. And this is really showing how our relationship to meat has shaped us as humans. And so 2 million plus years ago is pretty much the appearance of language, and that coincides roughly with when we started to hunt. And then when we domesticated animals, and roughly around there fermentation, like for cheeses appeared, that was the beginning of history. We suddenly had time to start writing an alphabet and writing our lives. And then more recently, we had this industrialization where the animal becomes a cell factory, actually more precisely a protein factory. And we have moved from the animal, as Agathe was saying, that will serve all sorts of purposes in our lives, to serving really as this factory. And if you were to invest in a t-shirt, for instance, or 4 t-shirts, in comparison to investing in a chicken, and it would take 54 days to make that t-shirt, and you would only get 4 t-shirts out of it, it's a lot of resources and time that go into making a very simple product, which would be really the equivalent of growing 1 chicken. There must be a simpler, better way. And we think that simpler, better way is self-cultivation, and this is a brewery, because that's really at scale is what we imagine these cell cultures to be grown in. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the burger, just so you get a sense of where it's at, and you're still teachable because you're not too drunk yet. So this is a photo of that burger. It's one of the samples. You see it's marked number 1. So how was it done? It was done by taking, theoretically, you take these cells out of the muscle, you do what's called a cell line, which is a cell that will reproduce itself, and then you put it inside. This is what's called fetal bovine serum. So this is the food for the cells. And then you put each one of these are 2 cells that are dividing in a petri dish. And then finally, theoretically, you get your burger, all right? So you would think, oh, it's pretty simple, easy process. Well, we haven't figured out a lot of these things. We haven't figured out the muscle, how you take these cell lines. They exist. Cell lines are a little bit like yeast or any kind of, almost like a commodity that you would buy on a catalog order. But right now, the ones that you can buy on a catalog order are for medical purposes. So, for instance, Chinese hamster ovaries are very well-known cell lines. But there is no such thing as very common muscle cell lines for pigs, for instance, or chicken. Those have to be figured out. And then, although we know how to do them, it's a matter of time and resources putting in. But this thing is the killer. This fetal bovine serum, which is the media, the food for the cells, we haven't figured it out. And look how laborious all of that is. So we have to figure out how to scale it, and that's what the research at New Harvest is trying to advance. We need to accelerate the time between this stage and the stage when we can think of commercialization. And so, you know, I'm telling you how big the problem of fetal bovine serum is. So you have to kill a cow and her baby in order to get that liquid. So every one of these bottles is 1 calf, and you take the blood out of its heart, because it's about half of that blood goes into it. It's a really inefficient system, and it definitely doesn't take animals out of the equation. This is how much fetal bovine serum was used for those burgers at Norcross Lab. Not super efficient. Great proof of concept though, we still have to figure this out. So our question at New Harvest is, how do you go from here, when we flew for a minute or so, and it was a miracle, to SpaceX, when you can actually have a private enterprise that's sending people into outer space in less than 100 years? Well, you build a field, and you make it fertile. So at New Harvest, we conduct research, and very much like a conductor in an orchestra, all of you would be our different musicians, and all of you would be doing a different kind of research, and we bring it all together so it coherently makes sense in the whole. That's how you can accelerate it into the market. We convene stakeholders, so we have, for instance, a meeting in a couple of months with a few of the professors who are interested in this kind of research, figuring out how we can ask for more funding from the government, because this is very much an outer space type of program where we need all the resources at our disposal. And finally, we inform the public. And for that, we have, for instance, a conference later in July. I'm going to give you more details. These are the organizations we work with. Here are private companies. You see Clara Foods, who's coming, and I think I've been eating up on your time. And these are universities. And so I will jump to our fantastic, wonderful graphics about our conference on July 13th and 14th, which sucks for French people. So none of you guys are going to be coming. No. Oh, good. Thank you, I guess. That's it. I'm done.
Thank you.